Admiral Alexander Kane stood motionless on the bridge of the Erebus, his tall, commanding figure silhouetted against the vast expanse of space. The ship's observation window stretched wide before him, framing the celestial Concordium station in all its cold, gleaming grandeur. The station floated like a mechanical leviathan in the void, its metallic arms spiraling outward, catching the faint light of distant stars. Once, this structure had been a symbol of unity and hope, a place where species from across the galaxy gathered to share knowledge and secure peace. But now, to Kane, it was nothing more than a monument to betrayal, its brilliance masking the darkness within. The silence of the bridge was broken by the sharp hiss of the doors sliding open. Lieutenant Lena Corvin entered, her normally composed demeanor replaced by a pale, anxious expression. Her steps were quick but hesitant, as though she carried a burden too heavy for her own shoulders. In her hands was a small data slate, its screen glowing faintly with encrypted text. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady but laced with tension, "you need to see this." Kane turned to face her, his piercing gray eyes meeting hers. Without a word, he took the data slate from her hands. The moment his gaze fell upon the screen, his expression hardened. The decrypted files were detailed, precise, and damning. Each line of text painted a picture of deceit, secret meetings held in shadowed chambers, covert alliances forged in whispers, and detailed plans for a coordinated assault on humanity's most vital colonies. The names of the conspirators stood out like scars on the page: the Zereth Dominion, an empire whose crystalline rulers claimed dominion over the stars for millennia, and the Dracaria Collective, a species renowned for their mastery of weapons that could shatter entire fleets. "They fear us," Kane murmured, his voice low and bitter. His eyes flicked across the files, absorbing every detail. "They think we've risen too fast. It took them thousands of years to reach where they are, and we've done it in centuries. That terrifies them." Corvin nodded, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. "The files confirm it, sir. They see us as a threat. They've been planning this for years." Kane's jaw tightened. The files revealed the full extent of the plot. The Zereth and Dracaria intended to strike at Nova Terra, humanity's largest off-world colony, Europa Outpost, a critical research station orbiting Jupiter, and the Helios mining platform, a facility essential for Earth's resource supply. The attacks would be disguised as pirate raids, ensuring plausible deniability while crippling humanity's infrastructure. The timeline was chillingly precise: the first strikes would occur in less than 48 hours. For a moment, Kane said nothing. He turned back to the observation window, his gaze fixed on the Concordium station. The station's arms, which once resembled a welcoming embrace, now seemed more like the claws of a predator poised to strike. He could almost feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him, suffocating in its enormity. "We trusted them," Kane said quietly, his voice filled with restrained fury. "For 10 years, we shared our technology, fought their wars, upheld their ideals. And this is how they repay us." Corvin shifted uncomfortably. "What are your orders, sir?" Kane's expression darkened. "We don't have time to wait for diplomacy. Contact Earth Command immediately. They need to see this." He handed the data slate back to her. "Priority Alpha. Send them everything. No delays." Corvin hesitated, her hand hovering over the slate. "Sir," she said carefully, "do you think they'll listen? The Zereth and Dracaria outnumber us in ships and resources. If we act rashly—" Kane cut her off with a sharp glance. "They've already made their move, Lieutenant. This isn't about numbers. It's about survival. If we don't act now, there won't be a humanity left to defend." Corvin straightened, her hesitation replaced by resolve. Understood, Admiral. She saluted and turned to leave, her footsteps echoing in the silence as she disappeared through the bridge doors. Left alone, Kane returned his gaze to the Concordium station. The stars beyond it twinkled coldly, indifferent to the treachery unfolding beneath their light. His mind raced, calculating strategies, weighing risks. He knew the odds were against them. Humanity was young compared to the ancient civilizations of the galaxy, its fleet smaller, its resources finite. But humanity had something the others didn't, the ability to adapt, to innovate, to fight with a ferocity born of desperation. They think they've outmaneuvered us, Kane muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. But they don't understand what we're capable of. The bridge grew silent once more, save for the faint hum of the ship's systems. Kane stood unmoving, his figure framed by the endless expanse of space. The countdown had begun, and with it, the first steps toward a conflict that would change the galaxy forever. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air as Admiral Alexander Kane stood in the command room of the Erebus, his shadow stretching long across the dimly lit space. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, the quiet hum of the ship's systems the only sound that dared to intrude. Kane's face was carved from stone, his expression unreadable as he stared at the holographic display before him. The map of human colonies shimmered faintly, each glowing point of fragile light in the vast darkness of space. These lights represented lives, millions of them depending on him to make the right call. With a slow, deliberate motion, Kane reached for the COMM panel. His fingers hovered for a moment, as though the weight of what he was about to do pressed against him. Then, with a sharp flick, he activated the secure channel to Earth command. His voice, steady and low, carried the gravity of the moment. "This is Admiral Kane." His tone left no room for debate. "Activate Protocol Eclipse." The words echoed in the stillness, their meaning sinking into the silence like a stone into deep water. Protocol Eclipse. The name itself was shrouded in secrecy, whispered only in the highest corridors of power. It was a contingency plan, devised in the darkest hours of humanity's rise, a plan meant not for diplomacy, but for survival. For years, it had remained buried, hidden under layers of classified files and forgotten by most. But now, Kane had unearthed it, and with it, the full weight of its implications. Lieutenant Lena Corvin stood nearby, her face pale but composed. She had never heard of Protocol Eclipse, but the way Kane spoke it sent a chill down her spine. She watched as he turned to her, his gray eyes sharp and unyielding. "This is no longer diplomacy," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "This is survival." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, black case. The surface was smooth and unmarked, save for a single red seal that glowed faintly in the dim light. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. "Deliver this to Ambassador Elias Ward at the Concordium station." "In person." Corvin hesitated, the weight of the case heavier than its size suggested. She looked up at Kane, searching his face for some sign of reassurance, some hint that this plan would work. But his expression was unreadable, his focus unshakable. Finally, she found her voice. "Sir," she began, her words careful, "do you think they'll back down? The Concordium, the Zirith, the Drakari. Do you think they'll stop this madness?" Kane's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze distant as though he were staring through her and into the void beyond. When he spoke, his voice was colder than she had ever heard it, each word sharp and deliberate. "No," he said simply. "They won't. They've already made their choice. But we'll give them the chance to reconsider." His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she saw the fire burning behind his calm exterior, the fierce determination that drove him. That's what makes us different, Lieutenant. We'll give them the chance to do the right thing, even if we know they won't take it. Corvin swallowed hard, her throat dry. She nodded, clutching the case tightly against her chest. Understood, Admiral, she said, her voice steadier now. She turned on her heel, her boots echoing against the metal floor as she left the room. As the door slid shut behind her, Kane stood alone once more. The dim light of the holographic map bathed his face in a cold, blue glow, casting deep shadows across his features. He stared at the glowing points of humanity's colonies, his mind racing through the possibilities. He could almost feel the weight of the billions of lives depending on him, pressing down on his shoulders like an invisible force. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in his mind. Was this the right call? Could they truly stand against the combined might of the Zereth Dominion and the Dracari Collective? But then he remembered the files, the cold, calculated plans for humanity's destruction. He remembered the faces of the people he had sworn to protect, the families, the children, the future of his species. And the doubt vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. They think they've cornered us, Kane muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. But they don't know what we're capable of. The room seemed to darken around him as he stood there, a lone figure against the vastness of space. The stars outside the observation window twinkled faintly, distant and indifferent. But Kane's gaze was fixed, his thoughts unrelenting. Humanity had been underestimated before. This time, they would show the galaxy what it truly meant to fight for survival. The Concordium Assembly Hall was a place of grandeur, its massive dome stretching high into the void above. The walls shimmered faintly, alive with the iridescent glow of alien materials that seemed to shift and ripple like liquid light. Rows of tiered seating encircled the chamber, filled with representatives from 60 different species, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some gleamed with crystalline bodies that refracted the ambient light into dazzling rainbows, others were cloaked in shadow, their features hidden behind swirling veils of smoke. The air was thick with tension, a palpable energy that crackled like static before a storm. Into this charged atmosphere strode Ambassador Elias Ward, his steps deliberate and unyielding. Clad in the dark, formal uniform of United Earth, he was flanked by 2 silent guards, their presence a stark reminder of the gravity of the moment. The humans, though physically smaller than many of the species present, carried themselves with a quiet defiance that seemed to ripple outward, unsettling the room. All eyes turned toward Ward as he entered, the murmurs of the assembly fading into an uneasy silence. At the center of the hall, raised on a platform of gleaming obsidian, stood Archspeaker Xyler, leader of the Zereth Dominion. His crystalline form towered over the assembly, his body a lattice of sharp, translucent angles that caught the light and refracted it into a cold, piercing brilliance. His very presence radiated authority, his faceted eyes glinting like twin stars as he regarded Ward with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Ward stopped at the edge of the central platform, his back straight and his gaze unwavering. His voice, calm but edged with steel, cut through the silence. "I invoke emergency speaking rights." The words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. A ripple of unease passed through the assembly, many of the alien representatives exchanging glances or shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Xyler tilted his head slightly, the crystalline structure of his body emitting a faint hum as he considered the request. For a moment, it seemed as though he might refuse, but then he inclined his head in a slow, deliberate motion. "Granted," Xyler said, his voice resonating like the chime of a great bell, cold and alien, yet undeniably commanding. Ward stepped onto the central platform, his boots clicking softly against the obsidian surface. As he reached the center, he activated a holographic display with a simple motion. A sphere of light erupted into the air above him, spinning slowly as it projected images and data into the chamber. The flickering blue light danced across the faces of the assembly, illuminating their features in sharp relief. For a decade, Ward began, his voice steady and clear, humanity has been a loyal member of this body. We have given freely of our technology, fought alongside you in wars not our own, and upheld the principles of peace that this assembly was founded upon. His words carried a weight that silenced even the faintest whispers. The images in the hologram shifted, displaying scenes of human ships in battle, soldiers fighting side by side with alien allies, and colonies thriving under the banner of the Concordium. But then, the tone of the display changed. The images darkened, replaced by intercepted messages, stolen technologies, and detailed invasion plans. The room seemed to grow colder as the evidence unfolded, the truth laid bare for all to see. In return, Ward continued, his tone hardening, some of you have plotted our destruction. Gasps echoed through the chamber, a ripple of shock and outrage that spread like wildfire. The hologram displayed encrypted communications between Zereth and Drakari officials, blueprints for human defenses, and plans for coordinated attacks on key colonies. The evidence was irrefutable, each piece fitting together to form a picture of betrayal that could not be denied. Ward's gaze swept across the assembly, his eyes burning with quiet fury. Humanity demands the immediate dissolution of the Concordium's current leadership, he said, his voice rising with conviction. We demand reparations for the sabotage of our colonies and recognition of our sovereignty. You have 24 hours to comply. The room erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over one another in a cacophony of voices, their protests and accusations blending into a storm of sound. Some rose from their seats, their forms towering and menacing, while others shrank back, their features twisted with guilt or fear. Through it all, Ward stood unmoving, his expression cold and unyielding. From the far side of the chamber, a deep, guttural voice cut through the din. General Calyx, the Drakari representative, rose to his full height, his massive, reptilian form casting a long shadow across the assembly. His scales gleamed like polished obsidian, and his eyes burned with a predatory light. A sneer curled across his jagged maw as he leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. And if we refuse? Calyx growled, his words heavy with menace. Your fleets are no match for ours. Your worlds are scattered and vulnerable. What will you do, human, when we crush you beneath our might? The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to Ward. The tension was suffocating, the air thick with the weight of the moment. For a long, agonizing second, Ward said nothing, his gaze locked onto Calyx's. Then, slowly, a faint smile crossed his lips, not one of amusement, but of grim determination. Then run, Ward said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that cut through the silence like a blade. The words hung in the air, their simplicity more powerful than any shouted threat. Calyx's sneer faltered, his eyes narrowing as he searched Ward's face for some sign of weakness. But there was none. Ward's expression was calm, his confidence unshakable. In that moment, the assembly seemed to hold its collective breath, the weight of humanity's resolve pressing down on them like a tidal wave. Ward turned without another word, stepping off the platform and striding toward the exit. His guards followed silently, their presence a reminder of the strength that backed his words. As the doors closed behind him, the chamber erupted once more, the voices of the assembly rising in a storm of chaos and fear. But Ward did not look back. His message had been delivered, and the clock was ticking. The vote was swift, almost perfunctory. The Concordian Assembly, with its towering crystalline walls and shimmering banners of interstellar unity, had cast its decision with cold finality. One by one, the representatives of 60 alien species raised their hands or whatever appendages they used to signal agreement against humanity's demands. The result was overwhelming, a near unanimous rejection. The air in the chamber felt heavy, weighted by the collective disdain for the audacity of the human race. At the center of it all stood Archspeaker Xyler, his crystalline form catching the light in sharp, refractive bursts. He watched the proceedings with an air of detached superiority, his angular face unreadable. When the final vote was cast, he rose from his obsidian platform, his voice resonating through the chamber like the toll of a distant bell. "Let it be recorded," he declared, his tone calm but laced with condescension, "that the Concordian rejects the ultimatum of Earth. Humanity's demands are born of arrogance, not reason. They are clever, yes, but they are still a young species. Their confidence will be their undoing." The words hung in the air, a proclamation of doom delivered with the icy certainty of one who believed himself untouchable. Around him, the assembly murmured in agreement, their voices blending into a low, resonant hum. Xyler turned to his advisors, who stood clustered like shadows at the edge of his platform. "Prepare our fleets," he commanded, his crystalline body emitting a faint, resonant hum that echoed his authority. "If the humans wish to test our resolve, we will show them the futility of defiance." But as the Archspeaker spoke, he remained unaware of the small, nearly invisible surveillance drone hovering high above the chamber. It was no larger than a grain of sand, its surface coated in a stealth material that rendered it undetectable to even the most advanced sensors. It drifted silently, its tiny lens trained on the assembly, transmitting every word, every gesture, every decision back to its masters. Far away, aboard the Erebus, Admiral Kane stood in the war room, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the glowing tactical displays that lined the walls. The air was thick with tension, a silence so profound it seemed to press against the skin. Kane's face was a mask of grim determination as he stared at the holographic projection before him, a live feed from the drone in the Concordian chamber. The feed flickered for a moment, then stabilized, revealing the final moments of Xyler's speech. Kane's jaw tightened as he listened, the Archspeaker's words cutting through the static like shards of ice. When the transmission ended, the image dissolved into a blank screen, leaving the room in near darkness. "They've made their choice," Kane said at last, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of inevitability. He turned to Lieutenant Corvin, who stood nearby, her face pale but resolute. She had been bracing for this moment, but now that it was here, the gravity of it settled heavily on her shoulders. "Activate Protocol Eclipse," Kane commanded, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. "Let's show them what happens when you corner humanity." Corvin nodded, her throat dry as she stepped forward to carry out the order. Her hands moved quickly over the console, inputting the necessary commands. As she worked, the room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, an unspoken understanding passing between the officers present. This was no longer a matter of diplomacy or negotiation. This was war. "Sir," Corvin said, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest, "Protocol Eclipse is officially active." Kane turned to face the room, his gaze sweeping over the officers and crew who stood at attention, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of the tactical displays. Each of them carried the same look: fear, yes, but also determination. They were the last line of defense, the ones tasked with carrying humanity's survival on their shoulders. And they would not falter. "This is what they think of us," Kane said, his voice rising slightly, filled with a quiet fury. "They think we're weak. They think we're naive. They think they can crush us because we dare to stand up for ourselves." He paused, his eyes burning with intensity as he looked each officer in the eye. They've forgotten what humanity is capable of. They've forgotten that when you push us to the edge, we don't break. We fight. The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of his words sinking deep into the hearts of everyone present. Outside the war room, the ship's systems began to shift, the activation of Protocol Eclipse setting off a chain reaction across the fleet. Engines roared to life, weapons systems hummed with lethal energy, and encrypted orders were transmitted to every human colony and outpost. The Erebus itself seemed to awaken, its sleek, black hull gleaming like a predator rising from the depths. Corvin turned back to Kane, her expression firm. Orders have been sent to all fleet commanders. They are ready, sir. Kane nodded, his gaze hardening as he turned back to the central display. The holographic map of the galaxy glowed faintly, the human territories marked in blue, surrounded by a sea of red, the territories of the Concordium. It was a stark visual reminder of the odds they faced, but Kane's expression did not waver. Good, he said simply. Then let's remind them why humanity survived the darkness of its own history. Let's remind them what happens when you try to take everything from us. The room fell silent once more, the only sound the faint hum of the ship's systems as they prepared for the coming storm. Outside the observation window, the stars stretched endlessly into the void, cold and indifferent. But within the Erebus, a fire had been lit, a fire that would burn brighter than any star, fueled by the unyielding spirit of a species that refused to be extinguished. The Concordian fleet surged toward the Sol system, their 300 warships cutting through the void like a swarm of predatory shadows. The vessels, each a testament to the technological might of their respective species, gleamed with alien energy. Their hulls pulsed faintly, alive with the power of weapons designed to devastate entire worlds. The commanders on board expected resistance, humanity's fleet scrambling in desperation, their defenses crumbling under the weight of superior numbers. But as they approached the outer edge of Earth's territory, they found nothing. The silence was unsettling. The outer defenses of the Sol system, once bristling with human ships and orbital platforms, appeared abandoned. The asteroid belt, often teeming with mining stations and patrols, was eerily empty. The faint hum of interstellar activity that usually filled the edges of space was gone, replaced by an oppressive quiet that seemed to stretch endlessly. The absence of resistance set the fleet on edge. Whispers of unease spread among the alien crews, their confidence beginning to waver. As the fleet pressed deeper into the system, suspicion grew. The vast emptiness felt like a trap waiting to be sprung, but no one could see where the threat would come from. When they neared Luna, Earth's moon, the unease deepened. The barren, cratered surface of the moon loomed ahead, cold and lifeless as it had always been. Yet something felt off. The moon's presence was too still, too quiet, as though it were holding its breath. And then, it moved. The lunar surface shimmered with an unnatural light, the dust and rock shifting like the skin of a living creature. Massive sections of the moon's crust split apart, sliding back to reveal the hidden truth beneath. What had appeared to be lifeless terrain was now revealed as a sprawling installation of unimaginable scale. Gleaming towers rose from the depths, their surfaces glowing with a cold, white light. Vast arrays of machinery hummed to life, their power rippling outward in waves that seemed to distort the very fabric of space. This was no mere defensive structure. This was Project Aegis, humanity's greatest secret. The Concordian fleet halted, their formation breaking as panic rippled through the ranks. The sight of the installation was overwhelming, its sheer size and complexity defying comprehension. This was not the work of a young species. This was the work of a civilization that had mastered forces far beyond what the Concordian had believed possible. The air in the command centers of the alien ships grew thick with fear, the confidence of their leaders crumbling under the weight of the revelation. And then, a voice cut through the chaos. Admiral Kane appeared on the Concordian fleet's communication channels, his image projected into every command deck. He stood tall, his expression calm but unyielding, his eyes burning with the cold fire of absolute resolve. Behind him, the faint glow of Earth's atmosphere shimmered like a distant promise or a warning. "You've underestimated us," Kane said, his voice steady and deliberate. Each word carried the weight of centuries of human struggle, of a species forged in the fires of adversity. "Allow me to demonstrate just how grave your mistake has been." As he spoke, the installation on Luna roared to life. A deep, resonant hum filled the void, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the Concordian fleet. The towers of Project Aegis began to shift, their gleaming surfaces aligning into a precise, deadly configuration. From the heart of the installation, a pulse of energy erupted, invisible to the eye but felt across the system like a ripple through the fabric of reality itself. Far away, light years from the Sol system, a distant star flared. It burned brighter than it ever had before, its surface erupting in a violent cascade of energy. The star's light reached the Concordian fleet moments later, a blinding flash that painted the dark void in shades of gold and crimson. The flare was no natural phenomenon, it was a message, a demonstration of power that could not be ignored. "This," Kane said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "is stellar manipulation technology. We can harness the forces of nature itself, bend the stars to our will. What you've seen is merely a fraction of what we are capable of. Similar installations have been built across human space. If provoked, we can destabilize entire star systems." The implications of his words were staggering. The Concordian fleet, with all its might, was suddenly insignificant in the face of such power. This was no longer a war of ships and weapons. This was a war of existential threats, where humanity held the ability to unmake the very stars that gave life to their enemies' worlds. On board the Eviscerator, the flagship of the Dracari, General Calyx sat frozen in his command chair. His reptilian eyes, usually filled with predatory confidence, now flickered with uncertainty. The sneer that so often curled his jagged maw was gone, replaced by a grimace of reluctant respect. He had underestimated the humans, as had the entire Concordium. They were not the naive, overconfident species they had believed. They were something far more dangerous. Calyx turned to his officers, his voice low and measured. "Order the fleet to retreat," he commanded, his tone betraying none of the turmoil within. "We'll regroup and reassess. This battle is not worth the cost." The Dracari officers hesitated for only a moment before carrying out his orders. Across the fleet, the massive warships began to pull back, their engines flaring as they turned away from the Sol system. The retreat was orderly, but the damage had already been done. The Concordian had come to Earth expecting submission. Instead, they had been shown the teeth of a species that refused to be conquered. As the last of the alien ships disappeared into the void, the Sol system fell silent once more. The installation on Luna powered down, its towers sinking back into the moon's surface, leaving no trace of the power that had been unleashed. Kane watched the retreat from the command deck of the Erebus, his expression unreadable. He knew this was only the beginning. The Concordian would return, but they would do so with fear in their hearts and caution in their every move. Humanity had shown its power, and in doing so, had changed the balance of the galaxy forever. The Concordian was reeling. Their retreat from the Sol system was a bitter pill to swallow, their pride shattered by humanity's unexpected display of power. In the shadowy halls of their war councils, whispers of fear and anger spread like wildfire. Plans were drawn, strategies debated, but no consensus could be reached. For the first time in centuries, the mighty Concordian found itself uncertain, its unity shaken by a single species that had dared to defy them. But humanity did not wait for them to recover. Admiral Kane, standing at the helm of humanity's military might, moved swiftly. He knew hesitation would only invite disaster. The Concordian would regroup, and when they returned, it would be with overwhelming force. Humanity's survival depended on staying one step ahead, on striking before their enemies could regain their footing. And so, Kane unleashed Spectre-class stealth drones, humanity's deadliest secret weapon. These drones were phantoms in the dark, their sleek, black forms invisible to even the most advanced detection systems. They moved like shadows through the void, silent and unseen, slipping past Concordian defenses with ease. Each one carried a payload designed for precision destruction, their targets carefully chosen to cripple the enemy's ability to wage war. The first strike came at a Zerith shipyard, a sprawling complex suspended in orbit around a molten red planet. The shipyard was a hive of activity, its docks filled with half-constructed warships and bustling workers. The Zerith, with their insect-like forms and hive-minded efficiency, moved in perfect synchronization as they prepared their fleet for the next assault on humanity. But they never saw the drones coming. The specters descended upon the shipyard like silent predators. Explosions blossomed in the darkness, their fiery light reflecting off the planet's surface. One by one, the docks crumbled, the skeletal frames of warships breaking apart and spiraling into the void. The Zerith workers panicked, their orderly movements devolving into chaos as they scrambled to escape the inferno. Within minutes, the shipyard was reduced to a field of debris, its once mighty fleet nothing more than twisted metal drifting in space. The next target was a Dracari communication hub, a massive structure carved into the rocky surface of a barren moon. The Dracari, a warlike species with scales as black as obsidian and eyes that burned like embers, prided themselves on their resilience. Their communication hub was heavily fortified, its defenses designed to withstand any assault. But the Spectres were not an ordinary threat. The drones slipped through the hub's defenses undetected, their black forms blending seamlessly with the moon's shadowy surface. They struck with surgical precision, targeting the hub's power generators and relay towers. One by one, the lights of the installation flickered and died, leaving the Dracari officers in darkness. The silence that followed was deafening, the once bustling hub now a lifeless shell. Across Concordian space, the pattern repeated. Supply depots, weapon factories, and military outposts were destroyed with ruthless efficiency. Each strike was a message, a demonstration of humanity's resolve. The Concordian had believed humanity weak, but now they saw the truth. This was not a species that would cower in fear. This was a species that would fight, that would strike back with a ferocity born of desperation and determination. As the fires of the counter-strike burned across the galaxy, President Ava Sinclair of Earth addressed the galaxy. Her broadcast was transmitted across every known system, her voice carried to the farthest reaches of space. She stood in the grand chamber of the United Earth Council, her figure framed by the blue and green of Earth spinning slowly behind her. Sinclair was a woman of quiet strength, her presence commanding but not overbearing. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to pierce through the screen as she spoke. There was no anger in her voice, no malice, only a calm, deliberate resolve that carried the weight of her people's collective will. "We do not seek war," she began, her tone steady and measured. "Humanity has always desired peace. We have reached out to the stars not as conquerors, but as explorers, as neighbors, as allies. But let me be clear, we will defend our people. We will defend our home." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Behind her, the faint hum of Earth's atmosphere seemed to echo her resolve, a reminder of what was at stake. "To those who mistake our desire for peace as weakness," she continued, her voice growing firmer, "Let this be your warning. Humanity will not be contained. We will not be subjugated. And we will not stand idle while our existence is threatened." There was a pause, a moment of silence that seemed to stretch across the galaxy. Then she spoke again, her final words ringing with quiet defiance. "If you come for us, know this, we will fight. And we will endure." The broadcast ended, but its impact lingered. Across the galaxy, those who watched felt the weight of her words. To humanity's allies, it was a call to solidarity. To their enemies, it was a chilling reminder of what they faced. And to the Concordium, it was a declaration of war in all but name. In the aftermath of the counterstrike, the Concordium found itself in disarray. The once united coalition of species was now fractured, its leaders divided over how to respond. Some called for immediate retaliation, their pride demanding vengeance for the humiliation they had suffered. Others urged caution, their fear of humanity's newfound power outweighing their desire for retribution. But one thing was clear, the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. Humanity, once dismissed as a minor player on the galactic stage, had proven itself a force to be reckoned with. The fires of war had been lit, and there was no turning back. And as the Concordium licked its wounds, humanity prepared for the battles yet to come. They had shown their teeth, but the fight was far from over. The galaxy had underestimated them once. It would not make the same mistake again. 6 months had passed, but the scars of war still lingered across the galaxy. The Concordium, once a symbol of dominance and control, was now crumbling from within. Its proud banner, once feared by countless worlds, had become a tattered relic of its former glory. The alliances it had forged through fear and subjugation were unraveling. Species that had once bowed to its might now looked to humanity's defiance as a beacon of hope. The cracks in the Concordium's foundation widened with each passing day, and soon, entire factions began to withdraw. Among the chaos, a new vision began to take shape, a coalition built not on fear, but on equality and cooperation. It was called the Stellar Accord, a fragile yet daring attempt to rewrite the rules of galactic diplomacy. Its first gathering was held on Haven Prime, a neutral asteroid station suspended in the shimmering light of a binary star system. The station, with its ancient halls carved into the rock, had long been a sanctuary for the displaced and the forgotten. Now, it was the birthplace of something far greater. Delegates from every corner of the galaxy arrived, their ships docking in the shadow of the asteroid's jagged surface. The air inside the station buzzed with tension and uncertainty. Old enemies walked side by side, their distrust barely concealed beneath formal greetings. The Zirith, their once perfect hive structure fractured by humanity's counterstrikes, moved in uneasy clusters. The Drakari, their obsidian scales dulled with the weight of recent defeats, stood apart, their fiery pride tempered by quiet caution. And yet, despite the unease, they had come. Even those who had once sought to crush humanity now found themselves drawn to this fragile hope for peace. In the heart of the station, the assembly chamber was a vast, circular hall carved from the asteroid's core. Its walls glimmered faintly with embedded crystals, reflecting the soft glow of the stars outside. Delegates filled the chamber, their voices a low murmur of anticipation. At the center stood Ambassador Ward, humanity's representative, a figure who embodied both the resilience and the hope of her people. Her presence commanded attention not through force, but through the quiet strength in her gaze. She stepped forward, her voice steady and clear as it echoed through the chamber. "The old order," she began, "thrived on fear and control. It was built on the belief that power alone could bring order to the galaxy. But that belief has failed. The Concordium's reign has left us divided, mistrustful, and scarred." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The delegates shifted uneasily, their expressions a mix of guilt and reflection. But we have a chance, Ward continued, her tones softening, to build something new. Something better. The Stellar Accord will not be an empire. It will not be a hierarchy. It will be a union, a promise that no species will be left behind, that no voice will go unheard. A ripple of emotion swept through the chamber. For many, her words were a revelation, a vision of a galaxy they had never dared to imagine. Even the Zirith and Drakari, humbled by their defeats, found themselves moved. Archspeaker Xyler, the Zirith's leader, rose from his place. His insectoid form, once rigid with arrogance, now seemed almost vulnerable. We underestimated humanity, Xyler admitted, his voice a low, resonant hum. We saw your kind as fragile, as fleeting. But your resilience has taught us otherwise. You have shown us the strength that comes from unity. And perhaps, in that unity, there is a lesson for us all. The chamber fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the assembly. For the first time, there was no hostility, no posturing, only the faint glimmer of understanding. In that moment, the seeds of a new alliance were sown. Far from the bustling halls of Haven Prime, Admiral Kane sat in quiet solitude, watching the proceedings from a distant outpost. The years of war had left their mark on him, his once imposing figure now softened by the weight of time and memory. He had retired from active service, but the fire that had driven him through humanity's darkest hours still burned quietly within. The room around him was simple, its walls adorned with relics of the past, a worn patch from the Erebus, a fragment of a shattered Concordian warship, and a small hologram of Earth, spinning gently in the air. Kane's gaze was distant, his thoughts lost in the echoes of battles fought and lives lost. A faint knock broke the silence, and Corvin, one of his closest confidants, entered the room. The younger man's face was lined with both hope and doubt, his eyes searching Kane's for guidance. "Do you think this alliance will last?" Corvin asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "The Stellar Accord, it feels so fragile. Like it could fall apart at any moment." Kane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to a hologram of Project Aegis, its towering spires glowing faintly in the dim light. The memory of what it had done, what it could still do, was a reminder of both humanity's strength and the terrible cost of wielding such power. "It has a chance," Kane said finally, his voice low but firm. "For the first time, species are meeting as equals. That's something new, something worth fighting for." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "But if anyone challenges that balance," his eyes flicked back to the hologram, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips, "they'll remember what happens when you provoke humanity?" Corvin nodded, a faint shiver running down his spine. He knew Kane wasn't speaking out of arrogance, but out of certainty. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy, not through conquest, but through resilience, innovation, and an unyielding will to survive. Back on Haven Prime, the assembly reached its climax. In the center of the chamber, a new emblem was unveiled, a circle of stars, each one shining equally bright. It was a simple design, but its meaning was profound. It symbolized a new era, one born from betrayal and bloodshed, but built on hope and unity. The delegates stood in silence, their gazes fixed on the emblem as it rotated slowly in the air. For humanity, it was a moment of triumph. Once dismissed as a minor species, they now stood as a beacon of innovation and cooperation. Their defiance had not only saved their own kind, but had also inspired a galaxy to dream of something greater. As the stars of the emblem reflected in the eyes of those gathered, the future of the galaxy remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: humanity's legacy would not be one of destruction, but of hope. And in that hope, There was power, a power greater than any weapon, greater than any fleet. It was the power to unite, to endure, and to build a future where every star burned equally bright.